Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this afternoon session from the Brain Health Committee. My name is Beth Rogozinski, and I am the chair of the Bio-Brain Health Committee. I am also the CEO and founder of Signal to Health, and I'm pleased to have you all here today for what is one of my most favorite topics in CNS spectrum, both diagnostics and therapeutics, and it's the mind-body electric. In 1855, Walt Whitman wrote, "I sing the body electric." And he was talking then about the combination of brain and soul and body and soul, and that we were these electrical beings. And, you know, if Mr. Walt had lived to this century, I think that he would have known that this was the mind-body electric. And in our current development phase, there are a number of really exciting both diagnostics and therapeutics that we think are actually going to help us tackle some of the CNS spectrum disorders that have been really kind of befuddling us as a biotech industry. Now, I think most people in this room are well aware, if you're here in a brain health event, that CNS spectrum disorders cost about $1.5 trillion a year in the US alone, according to the Information Technology and Innovation Forum. Globally, the numbers are actually just increasing dramatically as we see aging populations kind of come up in what I call the silver tsunami that's hitting us around the globe. It's also fairly well known that 99.6% of all molecules tested for Alzheimer's and dementia have failed. And these are phenomenal costs and outrageous failure rates, even for an industry that is based on 10 years and billions of dollars to market. So we're very excited to see some of the new nerve stim and biostim and photobiomodulation devices that will be tackling a lot of the psychiatry, neurology, and pain issues that are the single leading cause of disability around the world. Leading this panel here today is Sanjeev Wajah, who has a long history in this, and actually we mounted a panel on a similar topic last year, and I'm pleased to see, I hope some of you have come back from that. We've got a great panel of experts that Sanjeev has pulled together, and without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sanjeev and the Mind-Body Electric.
Thank you, Beth. My name is Sanjeev Wadhwa. I have a startup in AI for health, AI VR for health, which we call Life Singularity. Part of our journey has been to take an approach where we bring together the holistic view around an individual, not just their medical journey, but also their journey outside of a clinical setting. And part of that journey is, you know, your emotional mapping and ability to understand, you know, what drives you every day, your lifestyles and behaviors, and being able to collect all of that data to bring it together. Next slide. Get my clicker. So we are a part of the Google health ecosystem. We're part of Amazon's health ecosystem, and as well as NVIDIA. We are part of 3 different virtual accelerators. These are entities who support us in our go-to-market as we built out our fundamental offering of how we wanted to predict changes in health in your trajectory. A little bit about us.
And in order to do that, I have to make it near real time. So what we have done is we spent 3 years building the foundation, aggregating over 100 million patients' data, and these are all different health histories, very complex patients, 6,000 different diseases. Diabetes is 1,000 diseases, cancer is underlying inflammation, and so how do you capture all of these causalities and factors that impact your day-to-day health? But then, what do I breathe? Where do I live? How far do I live from the street, my context? And what are my exposure patterns when I go running on the beach or in the street? And we capture the neighborhood through drones, so we are capturing this daily environment, your ambient envelope around you, and so we could bring all of this data together. And then, if all of this is available, how does that impact my emotional state of mind? So it's a pretty holistic view of what you undergo in your daily life, and could I make that frictionless? And if I can make that transparent to you, and you become a contributor as a data source to us. So you're a living, breathing entity, and there's 10 million of you giving us this information at all times. We can begin to combine patterns that maybe work for you, potentially could work for somebody else. And there's a whole lot of discussion around HIPAA and privacy, but if you don't volunteer to me what your data is, how can I intervene? And so as we sort of thought about this, we began to say health could be near real time. Today we are at 0. We don't predict anything. I show up when I think I have a heart event and my heart is racing. I run to the hospital because it's here and now. But what if I could have done that 5 days ago? And so that's what we began to pull together as an ecosystem of your ambient data. And if I do that and combine that with millions of other entities, then I can define a future prediction about your trajectory. Then I can prevent, and hopefully from there we form this basis of changing the health equation completely. If I can save 10% of lives, that's 10% of 3 trillion.
So what we wanted to achieve was we began this complex journey of looking at how data could be brought together, and we have built a virtual assistant technology which brings all of this approach towards wellness in mind, right? So we begin merging your clinical and non-clinical journeys to be able to intervene in this health, initially for non-emergent conditions, but eventually over time with emergent conditions. And so as I take this forward, we wanted to make sure that our virtual assistant is empathetic. It learns about not only your daily journey, but learns to engage with you, when to engage with you, and the ability to then figure out approaches where if this virtual assistant has learned enough about my context, then it knows when to increase that dose for that particular medical device or for that particular intervention that we have deployed in your setting. So that engagement and that empathy that it learns to change the business model in order to be able to connect smart agreement technology with blockchain so that we could connect the dots with if your behaviors are changing, if you are following good behaviors, or if the baseline for you is changing, then we can capture that in an ongoing manner so we can begin to effectuate what that next intervention looks like. So it's real-time feedback. So that brought us, as we imagined this panel and where we could take our future together as we discuss these topics and begin to look at, for mental health. I'll bring this to before I go there, I want to introduce my panelists here, my esteemed panel here, to lay a foundation for what you'll learn today. What you'll see today is emerging set of technologies where we'll be healing with light, we'll be healing with biofeedback and feelings, and we'll learn from Richard's journey around looking at the aspects of healing with emotions and looking at data that may have caused you to be very astute in extreme amount of pain and how we have conquered that through flow technology, so healing with flow. And the idea that you can bring, and our fourth panelist is not here today, but that would have been our closing the loop of healing with electricity, bioelectricity. So it's 4 diverse technologies that we'll talk through today, and 4 diverse entrepreneurs who have brought their feedback from very different domains in terms of looking at that. And the idea that we didn't need to start with a medical background as an entity or to begin this journey. They all have very diverse backgrounds, and I'll introduce them one at a time, and we'll focus on their work today. So to my right is Dr. Paolo Cassano. And Dr. Paolo Cassano is a co-founder of Dr. Paolo Cassano is an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and the director of photobiomodulation and healing by light at Massachusetts General Hospital, Depression and Clinical Research Program, and he's also the principal investigator at the MGH Center for Anxiety and Stress Disorders. He received both his MD in medicine and surgery and his PhD in clinical neuropsychopharmacology from University of Pisa in Italy. And he has pursued postgraduate work in this space. A lot of publications in Dr. Cassano's background as well as his work in understanding brain electrical activity, EEGs, and connecting that with heart rate variability. His work is vastly published, and we welcome Dr. Kasana today. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for having me.
And I'll go down as we work towards other esteemed panelists and explain their work. I'll introduce them in turn. So with Paolo, I'll call it Paolo.
Sure.
Yes, that's good. So with Paolo, we began these discussions around, sort of healing with light. So maybe talk a little bit about the work you're doing at Nirax and your prior background. What drove you towards this?
So, I'm really, first of all, a physician. What I do day to day is seeing patients. I'm a community psychiatrist at Massachusetts General Hospital. But also, I am a researcher in depression and anxiety. And one thing I found is that although I study neuropsychopharmacology, and that's what I learned by training, people really don't like to take medications. And that's the honest truth. And when I was a community psychiatrist, my patient didn't like my treatments. And so as a researcher, I thought, well, what are we going to do about this? And what happened is that at the same time in the depression program at MGH where I was working, we're starting understanding depression as a low brain energy disorder. And what does light do? Well, as a matter of fact, we absorb light. Like plants, any eukaryotes absorb light. And we make energy out of it. So we thought, well, can we use light to energize the brain then? And I thought, well, back then I was very much into the clinical, in the trenches, you would say. I would say, well, maybe my patients will like the light better than the pills. So that's how it started, really.
Device. I mean, one of the comments you made to me was that 25% of people in the US wear a wearable, but we have no data feedback loop. And you looked at some of the aspects of social stigma and development of this technology. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes. So, I mean, the amazing thing is that we're closing a cycle here. We started with devices. Electroconvulsive therapy in psychiatry was the very first treatment, and to this day is the most effective treatment. Now, transcranial magnetic stimulation is also one of the most effective treatments. So we know that neuromodulation is and has the potential to be the most effective intervention for the brain. Actually, for decades now, we moved away from this technology for a simple reason. It was really hard to do. You had to anesthetize a patient. TMS, you need a person to be in the office once every day for 5 days a week, 4 weeks. Who can do that? Of course, if you're desperate, you're going to do that. Otherwise, the easy solution is the pill. Now, with portable devices, that's really the revolution because, and that's true for everybody in this panel. You'll see their technology. Once the technology is easily accessible, it's like a pill. You have it with you whenever you need it, but it has the potential and the benefits of the device. So I think that portability really made a huge difference.
And the neuroprotection and the neuroplastic characteristics, right, that emerged from it.
Yeah, so that's specific to the near-infrared light, and what has been seen in animal models and in culture as well, is that not only you're energizing the cell, and when I say the cell, the mitochondria, which are the powerhouse of the cell, are the center of the absorption of the light, which is really a photochemical reaction. So it trickles down into energy molecules that are used by the cell. And then once that happens, there's a cascade of effects, antioxidant effects, anti-inflammatory effects, and then neuroplasticity. Now, neuroplasticity is a big word, but basically means that your cell starts branching out again, which means more communication, more firing, and that really is that regeneration process that oftentimes leads to healing. It's the basis of healing.
Very good. So, I have to connect this to AI because that's kind of my job as well. So you looked at aspects of taking this data and personalization, right?
Absolutely.
You had to know the feedback loop, and to be able to read from the device to write to the device.
Yeah, so certainly one revolution is the fact that neuromodulation now, it's accessible with you. You can bring it anywhere, you can do it at home, and these devices are really non-significant risk devices. So you can use it alone without having the interface of the physician. But the other revolution in my mind is that now the enormous data, and Sanjay, you just showed us how much data we, on a daily basis, we accumulate, and we are not aware of it. Even, how much data our cell phone is collecting with all passive trackers. So what is, our tone, the voice of our tone, it might correlate with depression. How much we go and how far we go in a given day correlates with our state of mind as well. How fast we type, how many mistakes we make. Those are all indicators. Those are the so-called digital phenotyping. We all can be phenotyped digitally. And yet we have the physician, and I'm guilty of that, I'm the psychiatrist, that basically still phenotypes you based on symptoms, based on what you're telling me. In what? In 15 minutes? Maybe 30 minutes? When there's this huge amount of data. Now, because these are devices, and what do devices do? They learn. They're a machine. So we can use that learning and leverage it to have a personalized treatment. And that's another revolution.
Yeah, what I really liked about when we were discussing the AI component is the whole, sort of, if anybody watches Black Mirror on Netflix, the effect of, is too much of a good thing. Could I become addicted to too much of a good thing? And part of, the explanation you offered was that we could actually regulate the cap, the upper limit of exposure to a person as well.
Absolutely. Of course, the device can be limited. Sometimes it's hard to track how many pills you ingest, but it's easier to track how much you use.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you, Paolo.
You're welcome.
We'll come back to you, and I'll move on to some other participants on our panel. So let me introduce to you Richard Hanbury. Richard is has had an amazing journey. Pardon me. Richard was in an accident 25 years ago, injured his spinal cord, and from there came the inspiration for developing Sana. And so Richard, as he sort of looked at developing this capability, was dealing with coming from this as a perspective as a patient. And he said, lived through a lot of different pain and experienced it and wanted to see where we could take the future in terms of resolving pain. And none of the drug interventions worked. None of the med device interventions worked. So he developed Sana. So Richard is a founder and CEO of Sana Health, a neuromodulation platform for pain relief and deep relaxation, which he developed to eradicate his own life-threatening pain problem following a spinal cord injury near Sana in Yemen in 1992. It's now his mission to help others build this resilience that he has developed. Richard is an MBA with a background in healthcare and from Wharton, and has a diploma in law from College of Law, London. He's invested the last 25 years developing this technology from an original benchtop device to the current device, which is undergoing clinical trials. So a long journey and a long haul effect that we'll talk through in a minute. So Richard, walk us through maybe that day and the few months after, which took you on down this path.
Sure. So I was driving down a road and with a head-on, with a truck coming straight towards me. And then as I was level with that truck, a car pulled out from behind it. So my choice was a head-on collision or to go off a bridge. Went off a bridge, aortic tear, spinal injury from TH to T10, medevaced back to the UK. I bled internally for the 4 days while they took me to get me back to the UK. clinically dead for 8 minutes, in a coma, 6 weeks out of a coma, and then told that the accumulated nerve damage pain problem would kill me within 5 years. So I grew a resistance to opioids very quickly, but even if that hadn't happened, it would have been the same outcome, because in the long run, opioids stop working for everyone in that condition, because once you're over a certain amount of pain, opioids just don't cut it in the long run. So yeah, I was looking for alternatives. Back then, the term neuroplasticity had been coined, but if you'd asked 1,000 neuroscientists, 999 would have called you an idiot for asking the question. And so I was just looking for potential better painkiller. And I noticed when watching a film that, depending on how good the film was, it modulated my pain response. So modern day VR is basically what that film did. It's distraction therapy. But I realized when I was watching that film that there are only so many times you can look at a squirrel on 3D before it stops having an effect on your pain levels. So I was looking for a way that, how could I reliably produce a signal to generate those frequencies that would then be repeatable over time. So I started looking in the research in meditation, which brainwave frequencies were used, how they were affected, and I learned a lot about the whole sort of general field of brainwave entrainment. Now, everything that works within pain works because of the way it entrains brainwave frequencies. So Paolo already talked about transcranial magnetic stimulation. Then we have the electrics, so deep brain stimulation like Medtronic's doing. And then you have an opioids. And opioids work by generating a low delta frequency in the brain, which disrupts other pain pathways. So essentially, all of the ways which we know about that affect pain work through the same underlying mechanisms. And we just decided to use light and sound instead. So like Paolo, totally, we have the proof that light can heal. We have clinical data now showing 44% reduction in depression levels. And me personally, the first day that I had the device working properly, I had a 2-minute pain-free lag after using the device, and over a period of 3 months, that grew to my first 24-hour period, and that was the very end of 1993, and I haven't had a minute's nerve damage pain since that day.
So hold that thought. Very good. Thank you, Richard. So I'm going to play what Richard is working on, and we'll continue this discussion.
Chronic pain affects 100 million people in the US. In addition to sheer suffering, chronic pain causes multiple comorbidities, from increased cancer and cardiac risks to the problems of opioid addiction. In 1992, I had a severe spinal injury which caused nerve damage pain that was so severe I was given a 5-year life expectancy. I tried all of the standard treatments for chronic pain and nothing worked. So I developed Sana, which in just 3 months totally wiped out my underlying pain and saved my life. The device works by using pulsed light and sound and a heart rate variability feedback loop, which guides the user into a deep state of relaxation, which reduces pain and improves sleep. We have just completed a 75-person study, which showed a 3 times reduction in pain against placebo in just 10 minutes.
We are really excited to be running the clinical trial with Sana Health. We're really excited about this technology because we believe it could be truly disruptive in the way that we treat and think about chronic pain.
Here is Hattie, one of our earliest users.
It made my skin feel like it was normal again, and it made the pain go down.
If you're interested in helping us help millions of people like Hattie, I look forward to hearing from you.
Awesome. Thank you. So Richard, as you sort of researched meditation and these sort of outlier techniques, I would say, they were not mainstream. You were looking for solutions outside of the mainstream, and you landed on flow. And so talk through flow state and what your research has led you down this path.
Sure. Well, even back then, so back in 1992, the standard of care for chronic pain was essentially the same as it is now. So it starts with opioids, and then it ends up with, when you're really desperate, you go on to mindfulness-based stress reduction. It wasn't called that back then, but it was essentially the same thing. And mindfulness-based stress reduction works great when you have mild pain, and it works a little bit when you've got medium pain. When you've got severe pain, forget it. You've got an electrical storm going on in your head that's just way too strong for anything that you can self-directedly do. So I was aware that I needed something from the outside. I needed an external stimulus. And really, it was a question of starting to look at ways in which I could introduce a signal to the brain, and then measuring it with EEG, using myself as a barometer. Because of my extreme levels of nerve damage pain, I was a very sensitive barometer to small changes in the algorithms that I was testing, and then backing up that data with the EEG.
So, a lot of children experience pain, when they get burned. For example, a lot of burn victims go through a similar process of excruciating pain. Has this been applied, as to your knowledge, as far as your knowledge, to other domains as well, of other types of injuries?
Yeah, so basically, we're in the clinical trials that we've done so far, we picked the very worst two particular things we could look at. So we took opioid use disorder, so taking methadone addicts going into full withdrawal, because that was the most stressed we could possibly get anybody in a clinical setting in a reliable, repeatable way that was useful. So by getting people into full withdrawal and then using device versus sham, we showed an over 40% decrease in anxiety using device versus sham. We showed decrease in need for opioids, desire for opioids, and pain. And then in fibromyalgia was a second hard target we chose to do, not just because it was hard, but because everyone said that it wasn't possible. Fibromyalgia is largely ignored, and there are a couple of theories as to why there's no research into it. One is that it's complicated, but I would argue so is everything else like traumatic brain injury. The other theory is that it's because it affects 80% of women, that it doesn't retract anything like the research that you'd expect from a pain thing that debilitates the lives of 10 million Americans. So we've just finished a study in that. Again, we hit the over 40% level drop in decrease in depression symptoms, 40% decrease in anxiety symptoms, and also pain as well.
So these are multiple comorbidities that are being affected, even though you began with a primary condition of pain.
Yeah, because essentially, almost every type of pain, the more relaxed you can get someone, the less pain they perceive. Because if your brain is in a high frequency activity, you are perceiving pain at a higher amplitude. So the more relaxed you can get someone, the less pain they feel.
Very good. So in terms of, you touched upon sleep a little bit, right? As you looked at this, and because of pain, you couldn't sleep. So sleep deprivation, and that causes stress, and so it builds on to other aspects. Talk through a little bit about the effect on what you're seeing for sleep deprivation.
So we just did for me originally, the reason why I had the 5-year life expectancy was because pain disrupts slow wave sleep. And when you go over a certain level of pain, it disrupts all slow wave sleep. So when I was sleeping, I was generally lucidly dreaming and aware that I was in pain 50% of each night. That also obviously rapidly increases the suicide risk, and I definitely would have fallen into that category. But sleep underlies every other area, and we originally started developing the device for sleep, but our experience was that venture capitalists were very interested in buying devices. I put 32 people to sleep in meetings with a device and still didn't get enough money to go forward. Essentially, the issue is that my pillow guy can get up on TV and talk about how his clinical trial it proves that his pillow helps people go to sleep, and all he did was ring his 75 oldest customers. So that then started us looking more at the medical dimension. And one of our VCs said, look, you've simply got to focus on the people whose lives you can affect the most. And for us, that was a very easy thing to figure out, because pain is way more debilitating than insomnia. just purely statistically, there will be 20% of people in this room who have severe sleep problems bordering on insomnia. But yeah, see, I can see a few hands raised, and they're still in this room because you develop coping mechanisms. There are no coping mechanisms for severe pain. So that's why we chose to go for the hardest cases first and really focus on severe pain.
Fantastic piece of work. Okay, thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
We'll talk about Sarah now, and Sarah has a very unique perspective on this. I wanted to, when we put together this panel, we were thinking about not just, esteemed folks like Paolo who have had medical training, but people who have taken life experiences and have changed what we wanted to develop because they came from an entirely different perspective. Richard's was very unique, and so is Sarah's. So Sarah is a CEO of StoryUp XR, an interactive media tech professional with 25 years building successful platforms. Her company StoryUp makes Helium, the world's first biometrically powered VR, AR channel controlled by the user's brain and heart rate via their wearables. Sarah is a former interactive TV news journalist for the NBC, ABC, CBS affiliates in Missouri. She's a 12-time Mid-America Emmy Award-winning storyteller, which we'll talk a lot about today. And she spent decades reporting about the world's negativity and trauma in 5 continents. Sarah's company creates the variety of XR inputs, including brain-computer interfaces, heart rate variability, and respiration trackers. And she's very passionate about storytelling to story living and the mixed reality's effect on well-being. So welcome, Sarah.
Great to be here.
So I want to show you what Sarah has developed before we go into her background. Sarah came from this background of understanding trauma and being able to come up with
Your thoughts have power, not only in the virtual world, but in the real world as well.
So that's our 4th panelist back in Seattle. But we'll talk through Sarah's experience now. Sarah, talk to us a little bit about, you came through a background in journalism, experienced trauma, and wanted to change how you approach this whole model through feelings. So talk to us.
So I'm a media technologist. I've created for the last couple decades with using media. And part of my beat as a reporter was covering a lot of trauma, living by a police scanner for a couple decades. We covered the aftermath of the tsunami in Sri Lanka and Indonesia. And part of my beat was working with veterans. So we were covering these things called honor flights. Have any of you all heard of them? They fly veterans on free flights to see their memorials in Washington, D.C. And we were trying to find a solution for them. They weren't able to physically travel. So we started in 2012 using AR and augmented reality to live stream tours back to the veterans. Google, as you all may know, pulled the Google Glass program, and so we needed an alternative, and that alternative was VR. And to make a long story short, in thousands of tours of giving these veterans, we noticed that it appeared to be affecting their physiology, this media content. They weren't just watching it, they were feeling it. So a journalist, naturally curious person, we did a brain map, and another, and found that certain kinds of media has very specific impacts on different brain regions. And so we set out on a journey, myself and my co-founder, Dr. Jeff Tarrant, on compounding media, much as you might compound a drug to try to relieve baseline symptoms of anxiety and stress management. And so we are live streaming his background in neurofeedback. We are live streaming that electricity that comes from your wearables, your wearable, any other wearable, our tech, which is called UWare. It's a layer of technology that lives between content and hardware that is serving up these experiences or modifying these experiences based on very specific brain patterns. And it's a media channel, if you will, that's powered by your bioinformatics with your brain patterns and your heart rate. So for instance, you saw an augmented reality butterfly just with your phone or with your iPad. You're able to, we're using memory, emotion recall, which is a powerful tool to impact different feeling states, heart rate, and brain patterns as well. So you're told to recall a happy memory, a time when you felt love, joy, or appreciation. And there's a specific brain pattern in the area of your forehead. We're harnessing that brain pattern, putting it into a game engine with our technology, adding story, and allowing you to hatch and control these spatial computing environments in AR or VR with your feeling states. Not only for positivity, but also for calm, and then also for heart rate. So it gives you the illusion that you have power to control not only the virtual world, but the real world as well. And it's not really a metaphor, it's fact. You do have power within your own body to control your real world. And it's a powerful self-awareness tool for people to be able to better understand what they need to recall in their mind to control these virtual and augmented reality worlds.
So could it have helped Richard, for example, in his excruciating pain?
You know, I wouldn't want to say whether or not it could, because, you know, everybody's situation is different, and he's never tried it. So he would be able to know whether or not he could. We do have people that, so we have a couple published studies, Frontiers in Psychology, Journal of Neuroregulation, both published studies showing that helium reduced an area in the brain associated with anxiety on state trait anxiety scores, generalized anxiety disorder. It reduced self-report anxiety, and it increased that area of the brain that's associated with positivity, gamma asymmetry, left frontal gamma, quickly in as little as 4 minutes. So this is a little portable digital chill pill for moderate anxiety. It's not a replacement for psychotropic medication. In its current form, it's not a replacement for pain medication. It's a self-awareness tool and a feeling mirror that reminds you that you do have agency, you do have power to control your world. And we know that stress management is a layer in 60% of all illness and disease. And so we really see helium as an Intel chip, if you will, that our technology can be baked into a variety of different digital therapeutics. Because stress is a huge problem, and it's a more engaging way to do stress management. That we see that in our studies. You see it in all of the research out there that shows you that, VR, and as we've seen it in our studies, AR as well. They watch it longer, they remember it more, and it tricks your brain into thinking whatever you saw is real.
Very good. Yeah, you know, as Richard described his experience and a lot of the work we do at Life Singularity. I mean, when we approached a lot of we talked to over 50 entities in terms of building out our platform, and one consistent messaging was, a person is not, typically we would think of you as a diabetic, or we think of you as having a condition because that's what you showed up for, that condition in a hospital that day, or your physician. But in effect, like what Richard was describing, it's a storm, right? It's a storm of multiple comorbidities coacting, and we are just trying to solve that one issue, which we think was pain in his case, but it could be many other things. And what I really liked about what Sarah started to talk to me about was compounding these virtual experiences. So much like in the pharma world, we are taking multiple drugs, right? Maybe there's a patient who has 18 different conditions and is on 30 different drugs. Could we compound VR experiences the same way? So Sarah, talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset that you can. Media experiences impact alpha, they impact gamma asymmetry, they impact high beta activity. And so there are certain experiences on our platform that are separated not by that brain pattern activity, even though we have data to show that it does, but it's quiet mind, open heart, and those kinds of things. In the future of VR-ceuticals, AR-ceuticals, you will have alpha enhancers or high beta reducers or gamma asymmetry boosters, those kinds of things. But that rubric for how you measure media, immersive media, flat 2D media, gaming content doesn't exist. And we have gaming companies that come to us and say, what's my drug? I created a game about empathy. What is it doing to the brain or to the physiology? There isn't necessarily that formulary, that media formulary that correlates shifts in physiology to different media products, if you will.
So Richard, just to, when you were watching that film, right, you felt that 2-minute window of forgetful of, the pain, it went away kind of because you were in a different altered state of mind, right, and in a different mindset. So is this the path that helium is, could be helpful? I mean, film could be a cure.
Sure. So everyone in their daily lives does things that gets them into at least a partial flow state. Americans, let's call it what it is, obsession with sport and watching sports is because it gets your brain into a flow state. All types of meditation are designed to get your brain into either an alpha state or a combination alpha theta state. Very occasionally there's obscure meditation to get you into alpha theta delta state. But we already do lots of things that are designed to get us into this state. What I like about what you're doing is it's smart VR and AR because you've got that interactive part of it, because in that way you can carry on changing the stimulus so that you never actually it's not watching the same film twice. You're watching a different thing every single time.
Right.
And I think that's key to this process.
So Paolo, as you hear these experiences, right? So talk through a physician mindset here.
What I really love about all this is that we integrate sensors, and whether it's Richard experience, if I understand well your technology, to modulate the signal that will actually bring people in that zone that is conducive to decreasing pain. Is that correct?
So it was integral to how we found the underlying algorithms. Whilst we're going through FDA, we're not allowed to turn on our feedback loop. Afterwards, we will do, and we will get an extra layer of efficacy on top.
Okay, awesome. And you, Sarah, you're using the same information to kind of give the biofeedback, the feedback to the person that then kind of self-regulate based on that feedback. It is presented, however, as an image and a sound.
It's procedurally generated. Some of it is with video, and some of it's inside a game engine. So, for instance, in one experience, you have a wand that you fill up with your feelings of positivity, and then you're able to cast that emotion, that feeling out into the environment. You see the spirit animal come up. So it's according to the user. And everybody's brain patterns are different. It's not that you're positive or negative, and you can toggle the difficulty settings on it higher or lower, depending on the individual.
But then the HRV signal is then portrayed, whether it's a butterfly or leaves that come up. So it's visually represented.
Yes, there you are rewarded visually. The brain remembers what it sees. And so whether it's a snow globe and you're controlling this magic snow globe with that feeling of calm or positivity, you're floating through a nebula in space, you are erasing the graffiti off of a tree. They're all story-driven narratives that are powered by your mind and your heart.
So,
Yep,
so
please go ahead.
what I'm heading here is that there's a positive reinforcement. And that's also true whether it's less pain or this kind of visual. And that's also true for concentration. And that's critical to the use of sensors, because we all have experience all these sensors. There is fantastic, phenomenal for the first 6 months, and then you get bored of looking and tracking and making sense of this. So I think this is crucial also in the space of monitoring, which is important for our overall health, not only for whatever we produce, which is obviously an additional layer of benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the different outcomes, right? Because these are real world outcomes that you're experiencing and as part of your experience, et cetera. And you're by design, you're not storing this data. So this data gets destroyed for HIPAA reasons or...
Right now, and there's a big discussion this in spatial computing environments, because it's not just data from here, it's data all the way around you in 360 degrees. And with that, it being stored up in the cloud, if you're following anything that's going on with the AR cloud, there's concern, that you're capturing a space. So can you see inside their house?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. So data privacy is paramount to us. We're a part of an initiative called XRSI. If you go to xrsi.org, they're talking about all of these important aspects. We are building a data dashboard that will allow our users to do that, track that data over time, to track their progress. But right now, it's destroyed in the app because we have some questions that we need answered about that spatial data.
Mm-hmm. And Richard, as you sort of heard Sarah, right? Because Sarah often talks about this effective dose of VR as a hydromorphone, right? You're taking some opioid actually, right? Because it sort of takes away the pain that you were experiencing. Do you, as you sort of approach it now that you're kind of beyond the pain aspect of it, as you sort of envision that, do you think these different experiences as you could be leveraging in your, device, for example, could we connect these three technologies eventually?
I mean, certainly
as a patient, right?
Certainly the data value of these different things, compiling them, there's clearly a benefit there. I mean, very quickly we're going to have the largest pain database marrying subjective and objective data. Obviously, then putting that in context of what people are doing outside of using the device. So what drugs they're doing, what games they're playing, what social interactions they're having. Obviously, that adds on another layer of potential efficacy. It's going to be that's going to be very interesting and probably will happen a lot quicker than we currently think it will. As long as there are people like you trying to figure out how to use it all.
Yes.
I mean, our biggest challenges at the moment are not in the technology itself. It's in the ability to get that technology to market. And specifically around, our biggest problem is around venture capital. So when people look at us, they're like, oh, well, why haven't you done a 3,000 person study? Well, it's okay, I'm not a drug. I have more than a 5% efficacy. Therefore, to get a p-value, we need a sample size of 8. Now, a VC looking at an 8-person study, even with a p-value of 0.0001, goes, no, it's not big enough, and says, oh, you must have a larger study. Yeah. So the entrenchment of how people look at novel technologies really needs to accelerate to the point where they're just looking at the science and the scientific evidence rather than behavior patterns of what they're used to.
Yeah, law of large numbers.
Yeah, and I think that when that starts, then our kind of technologies will take off because you can do a lot more with neuromodulation and with things like this kind of biofeedback and with the infrared than you can do with a drug. And there's a reason why people don't like taking the drugs, and it's called side effects and low efficacy levels and the cost-benefit analysis not backing up the use as soon as there's something better there to use.
Right.
And just to play off of that, medication adherence. In the future, these digiceuticals, VRceuticals, ARceuticals, they're going to be paired like flavored medication, if you will, with existing pharmaceuticals because they have the potential to have a drugless way to reduce anxiety.
Yeah.
And we know that if you increase anxiety, or you decrease anxiety, you increase by 2 times your ability to that you will adhere to your medication regimen. So, really what we've built, are not just standalone experiences or devices. They are flavored medicine, if you will, for existing therapeutics or pharmaceutical interventions.
Yeah, I wanted to add something here. So it's kind of a funny experience of being the psychopharmacologist in the audience. Well, I'm not in the audience, I guess. But I think the crosstalk in between these technologies is going to be critical. We're all at the point where we understand that the data will make a tremendous difference in personalizing a treatment. And potentially, we will be to the point at some point to where our technologies and our data will crosstalk, and we'll be able to say, because there's no perfect treatment for anyone, that, well, to the user, you are at the point where augmentation actually with the flow-guided technique will actually be terrific, or actually a biofeedback approach would be terrific at this point, and the two technology could augment. And also, in the clinical, there is a lot of, for any of this technology, a lot of data, a lot of feedback that we can give to the user and say, well, you got to the point where you should see a psychiatrist, you should see a neurologist, and maybe pharmacotherapy could be an augmentation. So one thing doesn't exclude the other.
Right. I want to open up to the audience for some questions. Any thoughts, questions, feedback? These are new emerging technologies. They're all drugless, as you heard. Please, go ahead.
You queued it up very well, because one of the questions was, how would, from a clinical perspective, you integrate what is an imperfect set of systems right now, where you obviously want to go to in the future? I mean, you say, okay, I'm a patient, titrate me on gabapentin, give me some tramadol, but try the biofeedback. So, the activity necessary to integrate me as a patient is maybe going to be contrary to each of your individual objectives as a clinical trial, because you're going to treat me to optimize my experience, which is probably going to not allow for the clean type of studies necessary to get a product approved.
So can I answer that? So we've just, in our recent fibromyalgia study, everyone was supposed to maintain their current medications. Right. On day 1, someone decided just to stop taking their Xanax. There is because he was so relaxed, his carer decided he didn't need it anymore. There is absolutely nothing we can do about it. From the FDA standpoint, all of us, I think, we're non-significant risk devices. So we start by being additive to existing regimes, and then you allow the patient to titrate their own. Obviously, from our perspective, we'd love people not to titrate during the trial and only do it afterwards. But as long as there is physician oversight and they are getting advice on reducing their medications, I think it's a manageable problem.
And in ours, so we had 40 patients with generalized anxiety disorder, and they could not have any medication. So that's how we solved for that during our our study.
Paolo?
So I'll wear my physician hat here, and we have a photobiomodulation clinic at MGH Psychiatry in Boston, and all my patients, I try to dissuade them to try photobiomodulation, and the reason I do that is because they are approved treatments. And it would be unethical for me to suggest a treatment that it's not approved, there's no evidence or not enough evidence to suggest treatment for depression, anxiety, or cognitive disorders. However, there are people that fail existing treatments, there are people that don't tolerate it, and the side effects sometimes are awful. Sexual side effects, and the basic life, your relationships are hampered by your treatment. So people are desperate sometimes. And so that's when we suggest this treatment. For our clinical trial, absolutely, we suggest that people remain on their stable in their treatment if they are on any. Absolutely.
Great question. Others? Please.
My name is Greg.
Please walk up to the...
I'm from Highfield, Louisiana, and I have a friend that has a severe problem. Could I ask y'all for advice on her condition? Does that be proper?
Please.
Okay. She has been having a mechanical valve for 35 years. It was put in by Dr. DeBakey's partner. I mean, he was famous from Houston. Her husband was a doctor, and he died last year. She's been on this Coumadin for 35 years. She can't get off the Coumadin. There's other anticoagulants, but if you have the valve, you got to stay with Coumadin. She has lost her short-term memory. She has her long-term memory, but she's lost her short-term memory. And like if you go to visit her, 20 minutes, she won't know you came to visit her. And she has around the clock. What? I know, but this is about no. I've read the book by Dr. Doigre. His second book. The first book is How to Heal the Brain, and he talks about the light therapy that you talked about. But I thought, this is a stretch. I realize that, but this person has a severe problem, and I want to help her. So,
Paolo, you're the only one good to answer on that.
Sure. So again, this is not a professional advice because obviously I haven't seen the patient,
Right.
and it would be unethical even just to talk about any individual case in a large audience. I can speak in broad terms that near-infrared light has been used.
What I would want, it was a referral to somebody maybe in Houston or New Orleans or Atlanta, somebody relatively close.
Do you want to talk after this session?
Okay, I'll do that.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah, my name is Cynthia Kai. First of all, this is my first time in this kind of session. Very fascinating.
Thank you.
But question I have is, I'm a venture capitalist, so thinking about two things, and from Asia, so two things relate to that. First of all is why you think the mind-body research hasn't taken off from the kind of a medical professional stage, even though we all know, like in Asia, and even right now, a lot of medication and so forth, I think it's all related to that. Everybody knows when you have a jet lag after a long trip, you go kind of under the sun going, and then that will help on the jet lag. But why this hasn't been more research, and the most important, hasn't been more commercially successful, which I think is probably related to people, are they believing it? So how can we overcome that?
Yeah. I mean, please.
Well,
Sarah?
and maybe you'll echo this, but one of the reasons why some of these products don't get to market is a lack of funding. And you've heard him tell a story, about how, he was in a room with VCs and 32 people went to sleep with his product. It's not only a measure of do you have the research, do you have the product, but do you have the finances in place that can actually get your product to market?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think also, if you look back over the last 10 years, sensor technology has only just really evolved to the point where these things can be
Yes.
properly personalized. So, and that kind of precision medicine wasn't available 5 years ago. The first HRV sensor that was good enough for us to do what we wanted to do became available in 2017. So there was an early string of devices that that didn't cross the level of efficacy necessary for them to properly take off, and the support wasn't there to get them through that hump. I think we're now moving into an area where you can measure and get enough data to actually one, improve efficacy, but then support that through clinical trials. Definitely that's been my experience so far, is that the acquisition of data has got easier, and that is making it easier to make the case for these devices going out into the real world.
Paolo?
Yeah, I agree with both Sarah and Richard. I would say that there's also a cultural factor, that now everybody talks about AI, it talks about machine learning. 25% of us have wearable devices. So we all know that our cell phone, our smartphones collect a lot of data. So now the public is ready, the investors are ready, understand what this is about, and the technology is ready. As concerns transcranial near-infrared light, it's just a very young science.
Yeah.
Only 10 years, and you start from the bench and move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another issue that hasn't been solved yet, and that is, generally in the speaking, in the venture capital world, the people I've spoken to, you have medtech investors and you have consumer investors. Even when they exist within the same VC, they rarely talk to each other. They lob deals over the wall. And the reason for that is that the timelines are generally different, the investing criteria are different, the risk profiles are different, and a lot of these devices, you have to believe in the investing thesis of a consumerization of healthcare, because devices like ours are not going to breed primarily through physicians in the medium term and long run. I mean, ours will be initially, but you have to believe that people are actually going to want to take more control over their healthcare. Now, to me, that's obvious because I've drunk my own Kool-Aid, but as an investor, you'd have to believe that too.
And I think, too, the mind-body connection is difficult to put in a pitch deck. You get it, but it's hard to communicate in a deck.
Yeah. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I have that same experience. You know, we just had an event and a VC put the headband. He was coming to Boston from California, put the headband and said, "Oh my gosh, my headache is gone." And it was like a aha moment. So in that moment, when they put it on, when they try it, they understand it, they get it. Otherwise, it's just kind of this mysterious thing that they don't know what to make of.
Yeah, I mean, final thoughts here, just to bring it together. I mean, each of us has had to develop a product before we could go ask for investment. It wasn't the case that you could do this with a pitch deck. They wanted to see that this could indeed come true. So when we talk about could AI build all of these, continuous effects together, I had to spend 4.5 years building the technology to demonstrate that, similar to their experiences. So it is a long haul effect, and that's why we are saying now is the time that it'll probably take off, but that early investment had to be done by, I guess, not so healthy of brain people.
Sanjeev, can I say one more thing just to follow on Richard? One of the issues is also that our product are two-stage product. They might start as consumer product and they might evolve in a medical product. And that's also true for nutraceutical and others. So you really have to pitch to two different crowds of investors, and in order to have a physiological development of the product. So that's another challenge.
Final question. We've been thrown
I
out
think
of
there's
the
one point that hasn't been brought up, and that is we can talk about VCs, we can talk about everything else. We're not talking about our own willingness to participate in clinical trials. That is the biggest challenge in the overall industry. Maybe your experience exempted, but those willing to participate in clinical trials are less than 0.02% of those that could be in clinical trials, regardless of disease. And until that changes, nothing is going to really fundamentally be impacted by the technology because you still have to go through that.
I would say our problem is exactly the reverse.
Yeah.
We get inbound emails every single day of heartbreaking stories of this is the amount of pain I have, this is how long I've had it for, nothing's worked, when can I get a device? Oh, you can only give devices out if you're doing this part of a trial. When I'll fly to another city and I'll live there to do your trial. We don't have a problem of getting that recruitment. We have a problem of getting the money to do the trials.
Yeah.
We have endless investors saying, okay, well, if you just had that extra bit more data, then we'd give you the money, which you, by that stage you wouldn't need because you have the more data. So we need the people who are prepared to go, okay, we'll look at the data you've got. Okay, this is the next bit of data you're going to get. Okay, we'll fund that. That's our biggest issue.
Well, thank you, everyone. We've been waved out many times, so appreciate your interest. And if you want to see the products, Sarah's helium product, immersive goggles, and Richard's invention on Sana, please stop by. The Nirax headband, please stop by and see, experience it. Thank you.
Thank you.